I have committed no crime and need pay no penalty. Let me sit in some deserted corner, blending my voice with my lamenting pen, while the tears fall from my eyelashes to mingle with the words of blood I write.
As eloquent as ever, even in grief, Ghalib voiced the anguish of the Dilliwala. The ruthlessness of the British reprisal that befell Delhi in 1857 eclipsed even the carnage wrought by Nadir Shah's invasion. Khwaja Altaf Hussain Hali had later written,
O adventurer, your heart will be seared with pain and grief. Hearken to me. Do not go into the ruins of Delhi. At every step priceless pearls lie buried beneath the dust.
In the span of a few months, Shah Jahan's capital would change more than it had in the last few centuries. Its fairy-like pavilions and palatial havelis would become just a fading memory. 1857 marks the beginning of Delhi's twilight period. Chandni Chowk, the moonlight square, was the spinal column of Shahjahanabad. Running its silvery course down the length of the city, here you could buy anything, from a Persian rug to a panther. Its markets of spices, jewelry, works of art and foodstuff were amongst the most prosperous in Asia. It was said that if you want anything and ask where it is to be procured, the answer would be, oh, it can be had at Delhi.
And they were very, very well off. And they lived Indian lives. The important thing is the culture of Delhi. The culture of Delhi was that if in the Red Fort there was a poetic symposium, what we call a mushaira, by the time the poet went home, his verse would be heard by him. It was being sung by the ladies of the night in their bowers. The Panwalas were quoting it. The level of culture was very high, and that is what was shattered in 1857.
The Red Fort was orphaned. With the arrest of Bahadur Shah Zafar and the execution of his sons, the Mughal dynasty had come to an end. And with it, an entire milieu had ceased to exist. Both his sons executed, the last Mughal suffered the indignity of being treated like a prisoner. Charles John Griffiths, a witness to the events, described the pathetic condition of Bahadur Shah.
Sitting cross-legged on a cushion placed on a common native charpoy was the last representative of the great Mughal dynasty. In silence he sat day and night with his eyes cast to the ground. 3 feet from the king sat the officer on guard. The orders given were that on any attempt at a rescue, the officer was immediately to shoot the king with his own hand.
After a lengthy trial, Bahadur Shah Zafar was exiled to Rangoon, to die years later, a sad, lonely man. Delhi and its inhabitants fared no better than Bahadur Shah Zafar. Thousands were evicted from the city. Ghalib stated that hordes of men and women, commoners and noblemen, poured out of the gates of Delhi and took shelter in the numerous tombs outside. And those suspected of being sympathetic to the revolt were summarily executed, hung or blown from the mouths of cannons. And what remained of the city was ransacked in a systematic manner.
An aspect which very often we forget is that the British came to Delhi in September 1857 as conquerors. They had reclaimed the city, and this getting back of the city was accompanied by a very wide scale of plunder.
And they had these categories: who will loot what, who will loot the wheat and the rasad, what was called, who will loot the clothes, who will loot the shamianas, who will loot the doors. Everything was looted. And then people went into the houses of the nobles and took whatever they could from there. Whatever was looted was collected in one place on auction. For example, the crown of the emperor was sold for 5 whole pounds. And when it was auctioned in London, Queen Victoria bought it.
All these incidents left a deep scar in the psyche of the Dilliwalas. In a letter to a friend, Ghalib had written, "Had you been there, you would have seen the begums of the court walking about, their faces like the full moon, clothes dirty and shoes worn out. Desolate and dispirited, without the anchor of monarchy, the populace floundered. The very spirit of Delhi seemed to have died." Following the capture of the city, the troops were quartered in a number of prominent buildings: Colonel Skinner's house, Ghaziuddin Madrasa, and in an act of sheer insensitivity, the Jama Masjid. All through 1858 to 59, it was uncertain whether prayers would ever be said in the mosque. There was even a petition to remove the tank for the convenience of the Punjab infantry stationed there. Later it was also suggested that the masjid be torn down and a cathedral be constructed in its place.
The Jama Masjid was auctioned. It was bought by the butcher of Meerut, and because he was supplying the army, so he had the money, and that's why we have it.
It was only in 1862 that the Jama Masjid was handed back to the people. The British had also moved into the fort, which in the following years would be converted from a palace to an army cantonment. The Diwan-e-Khas was made into headquarters General Wilson. Although the proposal to pull down the fort and build a Fort Victoria was never implemented, within the palace itself, large-scale demolitions were carried out. A year later, Canning put a halt to this rampant destruction and ordered the preservation of old buildings of historical and architectural importance. Later, Lovat Fraser would describe his impressions of the fort in poignant terms.
Where once were leafy bowers, the blunt square outlines of British barracks, and at the entrance to the marble halls, quiet, alert, radiant, with ruddy English face, a young soldier of the gunners.
Half a century later, Curzon was to bemoan the fate of the palace.
The horrors that had been perpetrated in the interests of regiments and messes in the fairy-like pavilions and courts and gardens of Shah Jahan.